Lights, camera, action, and welcome back to the Soundtrack Collector. I'm your host, Christopher Spencer, author of Film and Television Soundtracks, 1950 to 1979, a critical history published by McFarlane and Company. If you've been here before, you know that I've recently wrapped up a series of videos covering the history of science fiction movie soundtracks since the dawn of cinema. Like 7 episodes, I think. Incredible. Now, let's take a quick look, very quick, at the notable sci-fi soundtracks of TV shows from the past 75 years. We're gonna whir through it, okay? Television's love affair with science fiction goes way back to like 1949 when TV became a thing, with Captain Video and his Video Rangers.
Captain Video calling Video Ranger. Don't be alarmed, gentlemen. The effects of the paralysis ray gun will wear off in a short time.
A pioneer of kid-focused space adventures that inspired a rush of similar shows like Tom Corbett, Space Cadet, and Space Patrol. These early programs may seem quaint today compared to what we have now, but they were crucial to setting the tone, literally and figuratively, for what sci-fi on television could sound like. The music that accompanied these serialized adventures were typical of the era, heroic orchestral fanfares and dramatic surges that wouldn't sound out of place in a 19th century symphony, to be honest. By 1959, though, the music of sci-fi on screens large and small had changed to reflect the paranoid sensibilities of the Red Scare era. On the large screen, Bernard Herrmann brought a modernist sensibility to movies like The Day the Earth Stood Still, and on the small screen, he brought it to The Twilight Zone. Suddenly, sci-fi wasn't just for kids. It could be eerie, introspective, and deeply human. While Marius Constant's spiraling electric guitar theme is still one of the most iconic pieces of TV music ever created, the real depth came from Herrmann, who brought his filmic mastery to the small screen. His sparse, tension-filled scores used harp, vibraphone, and oboe to conjure mystery and dread, while his polyrhythmic Outer Space suite laid the groundwork for later minimalists like Philip Glass and Steve Reich. Another hardcore modernist, Jerry Goldsmith, getting his start in the industry at that time, also made a mark blending serialism and jazz with pieces like Nervous Man in a $4 Room and The Invaders, showing that TV music could be as emotionally rich as anything on the big screen. Hot on Twilight Zone's heels came The Outer Limits in the early 60s, which brought a more overtly cinematic sound to the genre. Dominic Frontera's lush orchestrations, shimmering strings, bold brass, and eerie theremins took sci-fi scoring to new heights. Tracks like Probing the Galaxies and Spaceship Entering Atmosphere were more than background, they were integral to the show's immersive, mysterious feel. Now, across the Atlantic in 1963, we saw the debut of Doctor Who, a landmark not just in TV history, but in music history too. Ron Grainer composed the melody, but it was Delia Derbyshire and the BBC Radiophonic Workshop that brought it to life, using oscillators, tape loops, and sheer ingenuity. They crafted an iconic electronic theme years before synthesizers were mainstream. The TARDIS's now famous vorp vorp sound, a tortured piano and a house key. Through the decades, the theme evolved from Peter Howell's digital sheen in the 1980s to Dominic Glenn's moody 1986 version and John Debney's orchestral take in the 1996 TV movie. Each iteration capturing the show's changing tone while honoring its groundbreaking origins. Now, back in Hollywood, producer Irwin Allen built his own sci-fi empire in the 1960s with shows like Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Lost in Space, The Time Tunnel, and Land of the Giants. Voyage featured a nautical score by Paul Sawtelle, mixing shimmering harp and bold brass. In Lost in Space, a young John Williams brought whimsical energy and otherworldly fare using theremins, penny whistles, and layered percussion. These themes were more playful than heroic, but always evocative. With The Time Tunnel, Williams created swirling, polyrhythmic cues full of flutes and reverb guitars. And on Land of the Giants, he was blending jazz, bombast, and brassy excitement in what became some of Alan's most thrilling action scoring. No tour of the 1960s sci-fi music would be complete without Star Trek. Alexander Courage's iconic fanfare paired with William Shatner's monologue defined the sound of space exploration. Gene Roddenberry's vision extended to music. He wanted the score to focus on emotion, not just technology. The result was orchestral, expressive, and adventurous. Saul Kaplan's The Doomsday Machine and Gerald Fried's bass-driven Primal Amok Time remain fan favorites, balancing action with psychological nuance. This wasn't just music for TV, it was music for the future. Moving into the 1970s, I told you we're going to go fast. Jerry Anderson traded puppets for people in UFO, giving Barry Gray the chance to mix groovy big band jazz with space-age flourishes. Think spy flicks meet sci-fi. Then came Planet of the Apes in 1974. Sure, the live-action show spun off from the movies, where Lalo Schifrin, known for Mission Impossible, delivered an intense, percussion-heavy score that embraced atonality and tension, channeling the primal anxiety of the dystopian world, much like Jerry Goldsmith's original score. Barry Gray returned for Space 1999 in the mid-70s, this time blending disco-infused themes with dramatic cinematic scoring. The show's orchestral palette, full of trilling woodwinds, stabbing brass, and glissando harps, was a huge step up from UFO's campy grooves. Speaking of campy grooves, $6 Million Man. The sound of the 70s was shaped in large part by Oliver Nelson, a legendary jazz composer and arranger. He scored both the theme and much of the incidental music for the show during its run from 74 to 78. His music gave the series its sleek, high-tech vibe, equal parts action and intrigue. Meanwhile, Logan's Run gave Lawrence Rosenthal a chance to craft a more melodic, optimistic score, integrating synths with traditional orchestration in a way that reflected the show's hopeful tone, a contrast to Jerry Goldsmith's more experimental, atonal film score from a year or two earlier. As the decade ended, Battlestar Galactica leaned hard on Star Wars-style space opera. Stu Phillips delivered majestic orchestral themes, grand battle cues, and romantic interludes with exotic flair. No synths needed. He brought the same flair to Buck Rogers in the 25th Century from 79 to 81, where orchestral power mixed with electronic accents to give us rousing action, sultry seduction cues, and comic relief, often all in the same episode. Which brings us to the 1980s. Now, that's when synths really started to take over. The Transformers cranked things up with a bombastic theme song full of guitar riffs, heroic vocals, and pulsing synths. Composers Robert J. Walsh and Johnny Douglas made robot battles feel like rock operas. Over the years, remixes and reboots kept the music alive, but the original still hits the hardest. Then came Knight Rider. You already have that tune in your head. A synth-driven masterpiece by Stu Phillips and Glenn A. Larson. That opening theme, pure 80s perfection. It's impossible to hear it and not see Kit's red scanner flashing, right? Phillips handled the early episodes, but Don Peake kept the series pulsing with energy once he took over, combining electronic beats with orchestral tension. The 2005 soundtrack release, long overdue, brought it all back, and even hip-hop artists sampled it, proving Kit's cool never died. Quantum Leap closed out the decade with a more emotional, genre-blending approach. Mike Poke's main theme blended dreamy synths with orchestral flourishes, perfectly capturing the show's blend of science fiction and heart. Velton Ray Bunch took the lead on episode scoring, using period-appropriate cues and licensed tracks to help each leap feel rooted in time. The result was a soundtrack that was just as diverse and surprising as the series itself. So what made the 80s TV sound so iconic? Synths were king, of course, but it was the creative use of them that made these soundtracks memorable. The best composers layered textures, built unforgettable themes, and weren't afraid to get a little weird. The result? Music that defined a generation of TV and made every show feel like an event. Then came the 1990s. I love that era. The golden age of genre storytelling on TV, if you ask me, and one where music took on an even bigger role. How can we start this decade without talking about Star Trek: The Next Generation, technically started in '87? It ushered in an era of orchestral grandeur. Jerry Goldsmith's motion picture theme was reworked by Dennis McCarthy and Jay Chataway into the show's rousing intro. McCarthy brought heart and scale to the series, while Ron Jones delivered edge and energy, especially in episodes like The Best of Both Worlds. Together, they made TNG sound not just cinematic, but deeply human. Deep Space Nine turned the tone a bit darker. McCarthy's majestic but somber main theme captured the isolation of the space station on the edge of war. The episode's scores followed suit, especially during the Dominion War arcs. But DS9 also offered delicate emotional motifs, scoring the show's family bonds and philosophical debates with care and nuance. By Star Trek Voyager, Jerry Goldsmith was back, composing a stunning main theme full of mystery and resolve. The episodic scores from McCarthy and Chataway built on the Trek tradition while adding a sense of peril and wonder that came from being lost in deep space. Whether scoring battles with the Borg or quiet moments with the Doctor, the music kept pace with Voyager's long journey home. Outside the Federation, the 90s also gave us The X-Files. Oh my god, what a zeitgeist show that was, where Mark Snow's iconic theme, just a few eerie whistles and echoing reverb, became the sound of paranoia and the unexplained. Snow's atmospheric scores ranged from whisper quiet to pulse pounding, giving the show its unique sense of dread and wonder. Also from that era is Babylon 5, which took a different path. Composer Christopher Franke, formerly of Tangerine Dream, infused the show with sweeping symphonic scores that evolved each season. Themes shifted with character arcs, politics, and wars. His blend of electronic elements and choral drama gave Babylon 5 its epic scope and helped it stand apart from any other sci-fi show at the time. The 90s also brought back The Outer Limits, this time as an anthology revival with rotating composers like Mark Mancina and John Van Tongeren. The music shifted from orchestral horror to ambient unease depending on the story, but it always kept viewers on edge with its focus on mood and atmosphere. This was a series where sound did half the storytelling. Over in Japan, they were creating their own sci-fi shows and soundtracks. In the 1990s, we got Shiro Sagiso's score for Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is as emotionally complex as the series itself, mixing orchestral grandeur, jazz touches, and even classical homages. It creates a haunting soundscape. The instantly recognizable A Cruel Angel's Thesis and the many renditions of Fly Me to the Moon bookend episodes with emotional weight. Across numerous albums and especially the expansive 25th anniversary box, Sagiso's music dives deep into the psychological and thematic layers of the show. It's not just a soundtrack, it's a character in its own right. Few soundtracks in anime, or sci-fi for that matter, are as iconic as Cowboy Bebop. Composed by Yoko Kanno and performed by the Seatbelts, the music is a wild ride through jazz, blues, rock, and more. From the bombastic opening to the melancholic closer, the real folk blues, the score pulses with energy and soul. Spread across multiple albums like No Disc and Blue, the soundtrack doesn't just accompany the story, it defines it. It's a genre-bending masterpiece that's become legendary in both music and anime circles. Another Japanese classic, Trigun, brings a gritty, rock-infused score to the sci-fi western setting courtesy of composer Tsuneo Imahori. I'm sure I'm butchering that. The music leans into guitar-heavy themes and electronic beats with the explosive opening HT setting the tone. Whether it's the original series or Badlands Rumble, the soundtrack keeps pace with the show's high-octane action and emotional beats. It's a soundtrack that knows when to go loud and when to get introspective, a perfect match for Bash the Stampede's world. In later decades, we get even more from Japan, such as Space Dandy and cyberpunk edge runners. With Space Dandy, music becomes part of the show's intergalactic chaos, featuring a rotating cast of composers, including a return of Yoko Kanno and the seatbelts on select episodes. The soundtrack is a genre buffet: electronic, funk, rock, pop. Each episode brings a new sonic vibe to match its standalone story. The variety isn't just style, it's substance, adding to its unpredictable, madcap nature of the series. It's one of the most playful and experimental anime soundtracks out there. Dark, atmospheric, and emotionally raw. That's the sonic core of cyberpunk edge runners. Composer Akira Yamaoka, best known for his Silent Hill work, brings a brooding industrial and an electronic edge to the series. The soundtrack weaves through the neon-lit grime of Night City, intensifying the show's themes of loss, rebellion, and survival. It doesn't just accompany the action, it immerses you in it. The score, along with its licensed tracks, plays a huge role in the show's emotional punch and cyberpunk aesthetic. Back in the 90s, the Stargate franchise was born. While Jerry Goldsmith gave us the original 1994 film score, it was his son Joel Goldsmith who defined Stargate SG-1 from 97 to 2007, as well as its spin-offs. Joel's music brought grandeur and cohesion to the TV universe, weaving character leitmotifs and ancient alien influences into sweeping orchestral scores. Whether exploring ancient ruins or battling the gold, his music anchored the mythology with a bold cinematic identity. Now, the Stargate franchise continued with Stargate Atlantis in 2004. While SG-1 was still boldly going strong, Atlantis took us to a whole new galaxy and brought a fresh musical identity with it. Joel Goldsmith returned to craft the score, staying true to the franchise's orchestral roots but introducing new motifs to match the show's sense of discovery. The main theme felt regal and awe-inspiring, capturing the grandeur of the lost city of the ancients. Goldsmith's cues ranged from heroic to playful, eerie to epic, perfectly mirroring the show's blend of humor, mystery, wraith-fueled tension. Atlantis wasn't just a spin-off, it stood tall on its own sci-fi saga, and the music made that clear from episode 1. Then came Stargate Universe in 2009, and with it a bold tonal shift. Gone were the quippy missions and the lighthearted banter. This was a show about survival, desperation, and the unknown. Joel Goldsmith adjusted his palette accordingly, leaning into ambient textures, ominous drones, and emotional undercurrents. The score was sparse but powerful, often feeling like the hum of a haunted starship. While SGU didn't get an official soundtrack release, fan compilations have preserved its moody brilliance. It might have been the darkest Stargate yet, but musically is shown with atmosphere and depth. For the sci-fi TV soundtracks of the 2000s, composers really began pushing beyond traditional scoring, experimenting with global sounds, unusual instruments, emotional depth, and like sci-fi movies of the past 25 years, a lot more sound design. This was the era where TV music didn't just support the action, it became part of the storytelling DNA. If there's one show that redefined sci-fi scoring in the 2000s, it was the Battlestar Galactica reboot in 2004. Bear McCreary took over from Richard Gibbs after the pilot and turned the genre on its head. Forget traditional orchestral bombast, this score was primal, spiritual, and raw. Taiko drums pounded like war cries. Duduks and Eastern melodies evoke loss and longing. Pieces like Adama's theme carried Celtic grace, while the Cylon bass star music nodded to Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, making the enemy feel strangely familiar. And then there was the Gayatri Mantra opening cue, sacred, mysterious, unforgettable. McCready didn't just score the show, he became its voice. At the other end of the tonal spectrum was Firefly, came out a couple of years earlier, a space western with a lot of heart. Composer Greg Edmonson stitched together American folk instruments, banjo, fiddle, dobro, with Eastern accents like the duduk to reflect the show's multicultural frontier world setting. Each character had a distinct musical thread: the haunting Rivers Dance, the riotous Big Bar Fight, and of course the unforgettable Ballad of Serenity by Joss Whedon himself. Firefly only lasted a season, but its music endures as one of the most original and soulful soundtracks in the genre. 2004, we got Lost. It wasn't traditional sci-fi, but its mind-bending twists and time-hopping drama earned it a spot here, and so did its groundbreaking score. Michael Giacchino, a favorite on this channel, treated each episode like a feature film, composing lush, orchestral music with over 40 recurring motifs across 6 seasons. Life and death became the emotional heartbeat of the series, while Through the Looking Glass turned a season finale into a tear-jerking symphony. Giacchino also mastered the art of silence, knowing when to let absence speak louder than strings. Lost showed the industry that TV scores could rival Hollywood's best. It's no wonder Giacchino has gone so far since then. Speaking of suspense, Fringe, 2008, was pure sci-fi mystery, much like X-Files before it. Initially scored by who else but Michael Giacchino, the musical reins later passed to Chris Tilton, who matched the show's evolution with layered synths, orchestral swells, and recurring motifs. The Observer's theme crept in like a shadow. White Tulip tugged the heartstrings in a story about regret and forgiveness. With themes shifting across dimensions, Fringe was like a musical puzzle box, each cue unlocking new emotional terrain. And while all of this was unfolding, Doctor Who was reborn in 2005 with Christopher Eccleston at the controls and Murray Gold behind the music. Gold kept the core of Ron Grainer and Delia Derbyshire's original theme, but wrapped it in lush orchestration, brassy fanfare, and soaring emotion. Whether it was the haunting vocals on Doomsday or the stirring I Am the Doctor, Gold made Doctor Who feel intimate, epic, and modern, all at once. His work happened over a decade and helped define the show's emotional highs and lows across multiple regenerations. Of course, we can't talk about sci-fi in the modern era without checking in with Star Trek. The 21st century brought a whole new fleet of shows, each with its own sonic identity. First came Enterprise in 2001. It broke with tradition right away, opening not with a sweeping orchestral theme, but with a power ballad, Where My Heart Will Take Me, performed by Russell Watson. It divided fans, but undeniably gave the show a unique voice. Composers Dennis McCarthy and Jay Chataway provided rich episode scores, blending orchestral and electronic textures, highlighting the show's spirit of exploration and prequel-era optimism. Fast forward to Discovery in 2017, where composer Jeff Russo blended lush orchestration with electronic flourishes to underscore the show's fast-paced, character-driven drama. Russo also scored Star Trek Picard, particularly notable in Season 3, where composers Stephen Barton and Frederick Wiedemann masterfully weaved classic Trek themes into the new symphonic tapestry, honoring the past while boldly going forward. Then there was Black Mirror, 2011. A different kind of sci-fi altogether, more like The Twilight Zone, if you will. This anthology series tapped a variety of composers, including Ben Salisbury and Jeff Barrow, to create haunting cinematic scores. Every episode had its own musical language. Some leaned into ambient dread, others on nostalgic pop. Songs like Heaven is a Place on Earth and San Junipero and Anyone Who Knows What Love Is became cultural touchstones, deepening the show's emotional impact and social commentary. Orphan Black from 2013 to 17, it turned sound into identity. Trevor Yuli's score didn't just support the story, it helped distinguish each of the clone protagonists through sonic textures rather than traditional themes. It was clever, emotional, and immersive, blending orchestral flourishes with electronic experimentation. In 2014, we got The 100, composed by Tree Adams. Adams brought dark, post-apocalyptic grandeur with sweeping orchestration and Middle Eastern motifs. Leitmotifs like Balarka and Klexa themes gave emotional weight to the character arcs, while percussion-driven cues ratcheted up the tension in a world hanging by a thread. And then came the reboot of Westworld, 2016, where Raymond Djawadi took viewers on a sonic roller coaster with sweeping orchestral themes, ambient drones, and eerie player piano covers of Radiohead, Nirvana, and Kanye West. Djawadi blurred the lines between real and artificial, past and future. His score wasn't just music, it was part of the show's central mystery, helping viewers question what was real. Netflix rebooted Lost in Space in the 2010s, featuring a sweeping orchestral score by Christopher Leonards that pays homage to classic sci-fi while carving out a modern identity. Leonards blends soaring brass, lush strings, and nods to John Williams' original Lost in Space theme to evoke wonder, danger, and family bonds. The soundtrack spans all 3 seasons, with standout tracks like Will Exploring, Danger Will Robinson capturing the emotional core of the show. While mostly score-driven, the series has the occasional licensed track, adding a layer of grounded nostalgia. It's a soundtrack that feels both timeless and boldly adventurous. Clinton Shorter's score for The Expanse, based on the long-running novel series, delivers a dark, immersive soundscape that perfectly matches the show's tense, politically charged vision of a colonized solar system. Blending orchestral power with ambient and electronic textures, Shorter creates a sonic backdrop that amplifies the series' suspense, mystery, and emotional gravity. Tracks like Hostage, Signal, and Walla Walla underscore the urgency and existential weight of the narrative. Released in volumes across the show's run, the soundtrack has earned critical acclaim for deepening the show's atmosphere and standing out as a masterclass in modern sci-fi TV scoring. Stranger Things came along in 2016, rewound the clock to the 1980s with synth-heavy soundscapes from Kyle Dixon and Michael Stein. From the moment you hear the opening theme, you're transported to the world of neon lights and demogorgons. But it wasn't all nostalgia. The music carried emotional weight too, with cues like Eleven's theme and the Upside Down anchoring the series' more human moments. Add in the era-defining needle drops like Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill, and you've got a soundtrack that redefined pop culture. Similarly, the German sci-fi thriller Dark features a gripping, atmospheric score by Ben Frost, whose unsettling blend of electronic and orchestral music perfectly matches the show's themes of time travel and existential dread. Frost's minimalist motifs and eerie textures heighten tension and subtly signal deeper narrative shifts, making the music an essential part of the story. Complementing the score is a powerful selection of licensed tracks, from Agnes Obel's Familiar to Apparat's haunting Goodbye in the opening credits, that amplify the show's emotional and mysterious tone. Across 3 soundtrack releases, Dark delivers one of the most immersive sonic experiences in modern science fiction television. Ben Frost, fresh off of Dark, brought his signature intensity to Raised by Wolves in 2020, layering distorted vocals, industrial drones, and eerie harmonics with the help of Mark Streitenfeld. The opening theme, featuring Swedish vocalist Miriam Wallenton, set a surreal tone for the show that was equal parts philosophy, horror, and sci-fi dreamscape. Meanwhile, Apple TV has raised the bar with scores for shows like Foundation and Silo. In Foundation, Bear McCreary, from Battlestar Galactica fame, blended algorithmic composition with orchestral grandeur, using custom software he translated psychohistory into sound, a fusion of math and music, of science and soul. The choral arrangements, especially the chant of the luminous, gave the show a spiritual backbone worthy of its sweeping narrative. For Silo, scored by Atle Orvarsson, took a more intimate approach, with magnetic resonator pianos, solo violins, and field recordings from actual silos. The music captured both the isolation and the grandeur of life underground. Emotional, experimental, and deeply textured, it elevated the show's dystopian mystery. Now, as we approach the end of this survey of science fiction TV soundtracks, what better franchise can we talk about than Star Wars? On TV, that is. Let's just focus on a couple of them and start with The Mandalorian. Ludwig Göransson took a bold step away from the John Williams playbook while still paying tribute to its spirit. His use of the bass recorder as a central melodic instrument gave the show its instantly recognizable main theme. Add to that Western guitars, tribal percussion, and full orchestras, and you've got a sound that's as rugged as the Mandalorian himself. Göransson's work wasn't just fresh, it set a new bar for what Star Wars could sound like on TV. Finally, the soundtrack for Andor, composed by Nicholas Brittel, breaks new ground for the Star Wars universe with its bold fusion of orchestral and electronic elements. Departing from the franchise's traditional symphonic style, Brittel crafts a moody, textured score that mirrors the series' themes of rebellion, tension, and personal transformation. The evolving Andor theme threads through the episodes, adapting to shifting emotional tones and scoring arcs. Recorded at London's Air Studios under COVID-era constraints, the music was released across 3 volumes, later compiled into a vinyl edition. I expect we'll see more of that with the newest season of Andor. Critically acclaimed, Brittel's score stands out as one of the most innovative in the galaxy, far, far away. Okay, that's my roundup, a speedy one, of sci-fi TV soundtracks from early days to present day. I'm sure I missed a lot, especially from the past 25 years when there's been this explosion of interest in sci-fi on streaming. Did I miss one of your favorites? Let me know in the comments. Of the ones I mentioned, what are your favorites? Be sure to let me know. Next time, I'll wrap up the Sci-Fi Soundtracks series with a shorter video about some sci-fi cult soundtracks from Europe. Stuff like La Planète Sauvage and The 10th Victim. Great fun. I expect to see you there. Until next time, keep collecting and keep listening.